Hi you guys, so this is another video that I'm doing. This is about the victimhood mentality and empowerment mentality. With the Black Lives Matter movement and many of these movements of the feminist movement and the hashtag Me Too and all these movements that have been pushing by a lot of the left, a lot of this seems to be, apparently they're trying to push for empowerment, but if anything, they're putting victimhood. We live in a country where we are all equal under the law if you're a citizen. Now, you can always have some sort of people interpreting the law in unfair way, and there could be corruption. For example, that actually happens against Republicans. There's biasm. There has been reports of bias against Republicans in many places. There's sometimes bias against Christians in certain companies that they need to act a certain way, and they don't allow them to express themselves. There's bias against Republicans in the IRS. The way that the Department of Justice acted towards the Trump administration. That's in for another debate, but there's a lot of things that are unfolding of how many of the people in the Trump administration were being targeted, something that the Obama administration actually did when we're able to get away with it. But technically, under the law, we're all supposed to be equal. But unfortunately, there is incidents where sometimes people are not getting the fair treatment of the law. But what I'm trying to tell you is that there is something that this victimhood mentality is not going to empower people. If anything, it's going to give more power to the racists. You live in a country where you can apply to the same school as a white person. You live in a country where you can vote just as a white person. You live in a country where technically the cop has to protect you just like a white person. Now, you can always, unfortunately, meet a racist cop, and if there is evidence, not just assumption, but if there is evidence that the cop is racist, then they definitely should be fired and lose their job. And if they risk the lives of dangers of peoples of color, then they should go to jail too. But we live in a country that technically, just the statistics is that's not true. They're not being killed disproportionately because of just being black. The statistics proves that. And if there is statistics that blacks are being disproportionately shot by police, there's also statistics that disproportionately they commit more violent crimes. Therefore, they have a higher chance of encountering with police. And when you have a higher chance of encountering police, you also have a chance of encountering with the bad police. The more chance you have encounters with police, the more chances you're going to meet a bad cop. So, but I want to explain to you about the problem with the victimhood mentality. We look at Asians, and Asians are still discriminated. However, we can see that they are better off middle class. They actually have a better medium income class than most whites do. But it doesn't mean that they're not discriminated. It doesn't mean that they're not harassed in some areas of the country. That doesn't prove that they're not. But when it comes to the police shootings, and when it comes to police brutality, not that it doesn't exist, because of course there is incidents where even Asians go through police brutality, but in general they do not go through that, and they're not white. They're not whites. They're technically a minority. And we can look back in history that the Chinese, before they were allowed to become citizens, they were not treated fair under the law. They were treated actually much worse than Hispanics are right now. You know, because Hispanics, even though they were tanned, they were considered white. Even though they faced through some discrimination in this country, they were considered white. Whereas Chinese were not considered white. They were never considered white. They were always considered Chinese or Asian. And we see that however that Chinese were somehow, that Asians are somehow even better off. And why? Well, because the thing is that we need to see is that segregation laws are a thing of the past. There also is there's no I'm not saying racism doesn't exist. I'm saying that there's no segregation, there's no slavery, and there's a lot of thing that they try to do in a way to try to even the scales between black and white, and that's why they created affirmative action. But I do believe that it actually does more harm than it does good. So, but I want to use this biblical example. Racism is still alive. And I want to use the example of Moses and Jesus, of this thing between the victimhood and empowerment. You see, Moses, the people were slaves for 400 years in Egypt, the Israelites. Now, backstory to this, it really happened because they allowed themselves to become indentured servants to the Egyptians. But as time progressed, there was a cruel or brutal Egyptian that apparently he changed the contracts between the Israelites and the Egyptian government, and it put a lot of the Israelites in a disadvantage, and they were treated horribly. They received harsh treatments, and for so many years they were treated bad. So for so many years the Israelites had a slave mentality, that after God freed them, they needed to take the Egypt out of that. You can see that in a lot of preachings of pastors, that you leave Egypt, but you still had to take the Egypt out of their minds, because even though they left Egypt, they still had that slave mentality, and they still needed to get empowerment, because they were walking in the desert. They were not walking in the victory. They were still walking as being oppressed. You can see how they were constantly complaining to Moses in the book of Exodus. They were constantly complaining to Moses, and I think it also in the book of Deuteronomy. And that's because they didn't leave that Egyptian slave mentality out of them. The same thing can happen with Jesus. You see, there is still sin, but Jesus defeated sin. When he died on the cross and he shed his blood on the cross, he did it so that we would not be under the curse of sin. Now, sin still exists, just like racism still exists. Technically, racism is connected to sin. So sin doesn't exist. Sin still exists, but the power of sin over our lives is gone. But we have to walk in the empowerment and not in the victimhood mentality that believe that sin has more power over us. The same thing we can say with racism in this country. There is no segregation. You still have racist people. You still have people that are in power that have some racial bias, but majority of people in power do not see it from a racism standpoint. And you have that, but if you believe that you can't do anything, then you're not going to believe in yourself. And this is the problem of having a victimhood mentality, that we believe that the government needs to change drastically, erase all racism so that we can have some advantages in this country, so that we can finally say that we declare victory. I'm gonna have to break it to you, that's never going to exist. You're never going to have a country where you eradicate all the racists. And if you have that mindset, then you're never going to do anything with your life. You have to make changes on yourself. You have to take the step. Life is not fair. And you have to focus on those people that are going to be there, whether they're black, white, or others, that will actually be willing to help you out, lend you a hand, help you get a job, help you make connections. That's the whole point that we walk in this world. There's people that are going to hate you. Even your own kind is going to hate you. But if you always have this mindset of being victimhood, of having this victim mentality that I can't make it because the white man is oppressing me, I can't make it because this country is against black and Latinos, I can't make it, then you're never going to do it, because you're always wanting to looking for the acceptance of others. And the reality is that as a person, when I was in high school, that constantly believed that I needed to be popular because I have a high expectation, and it turns out that it was never like that. My life was pretty miserable. It wasn't until I got out of that state of mind that I began to realize that I don't need to focus on who loves me and who doesn't. I just got to focus on the ones who are willing to help me out, and we can make a connection. We can network, and we can do something about that. And I'm not going to focus on the people that did not believe that I had a good business idea. I'm not going to focus on those that don't like me. I'm not going to focus on those that don't find me attractive. I'm going to focus on those that love me. And that's the thing about this victimhood mentality, that it doesn't empower you. It creates insecurity among very youth. And this victimhood mentality is very, very good because you become dependent on these activists. These activists are empowered. And not only that, racists are empowered. White supremacists are empowered because they know they have the power over you because you feel you put them as the oppressors, when the reality is that they have no power over you. Could you believe that if you actually begin to make good choices, if you actually begin to make money, a white supremacist who's a working class, I'm not trying to discriminate. I'm not trying to put down these white folks. But let's just say there's a white person who's a racist, who lives in a trailer park, who burns crosses in the middle of the field, but they have no money, they have no power, just a group of Klan member. Do you think they're really going to have racists? Do you think they're going to have a power over the black celebrities who are pretty much the elite class if they somehow throw a party? What power, how much power do these racist rednecks have if they burn the cross in front of a party of, let's just pretend that P. Diddy decides to throw a party somewhere in Texas in a remote area, and he invites all his people with his security guards and his private security, and you have these racist rednecks and they say, I don't want this kind. Do you think who's the one more in power? Ask yourself this. The rednecks who make no less than who make minimum wage and whose houses are pretty much torn apart, but they have hatred in their heart. Who has the most? Who has the more to win? What I know I don't know if it's a pretty good example or not, but what I'm trying to say is that you only give them power they only have this power as how much you allow them to have the power in this country and in this world. So I think this victimhood mentality needs to go out of the window. You need to focus more on empowerment, because when you have them believe in victimhood, that there's no reason to follow the law because cops are just racist. Even if he's a black cop, he's under the white supremacist leadership, so he's a racist too. There's no need to get an education, because at the end of the day, education is not going to do good because I'm black. There's no point of me trying to do good in a job because at the end of the day, I'm black. I'm never going to do anything. They're always going to give it to the white person. And if there's no white person, then they're going to give it to the Asian, the Latino, or the light-skinned black person because it's closer to white. They're never going to give it to me. And that's the problem with this victimhood mentality. And we need to stop that. We should go more for empowerment than victimhood. All right. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say for that.